Todd Baratz, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here. For
Hi.
those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
Yeah, hi. And I'm glad to be here and to meet you. I am a therapist. I'm a couples therapist. I'm a sex therapist. I see individuals and I see couples for ongoing therapy for a variety of issues. Also a creator on Instagram at yourdiagnonsense. I have a podcast called Our Diagnonsense. I just wrote a book called How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. So I do a lot of things, all within the relationship and sex uh, wellness space.
So, what inspired you to choose this topic in particular and be a therapist in it?
It's a very personal thing. I have been in therapy all my life, and it's literally saved my life. So I started therapy when I was 10. I started seeing this therapist, Derek, who I write about in my book, who I still see today, actually, when I was 15. And he, really saved my life and turned me on to psychology and philosophy and all of this different stuff that I started reading. And the more that I learned and the more that I experienced in therapy, the less anxious that I felt, the more I could understand myself, the more I could understand my family and all of the dysfunction that was happening. So from there, when I got to college, it was just I wanted to learn more. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm going to be a sex therapist.
Mm.
But eventually that's what it turned into. I didn't, to be honest, when I was younger, think I was really going to make it or be alive. So
Oh,
thinking about
wow.
what I was going to do wasn't really part of my story, but it really wasn't until like mid-college that I was like, oh, I can actually have a career, I could actually have a job, and I could be a therapist just like Derek and help people just like I had been helped. Um, and so then I went to grad school and, got licensed and certified and whatever.
Did you find that the
But very
sex area
personal.
was like the area where people were struggling most, like in relationships and sex?
Well, what I found at the time was that nobody was talking about sex. In college, we had one course on sex, and that was about sex. That was on sexuality. That was on like gender. I mean, it was on everything. This was 15 years ago, so nobody was really talking about sex or making memes about sex. Um, and so Derek is a sex therapist, and at 15, I was just asked all of these questions about my sexuality and being gay. It was really, really important that I had somebody asking me those questions. So when got to school and I saw that no one was talking about sex, I was like, what is this about? I thought that's just what you talk about, especially if you're
Mm.
going to see a couple, you talk about sex, of course, but not so much at the time. So from there, I knew that I wanted to focus on this, that I knew it was something very important that people were dealing with. And it was something that I thought was really fascinating and interesting. And so that's really what brought me there.
So, tell us how you were inspired to start your Instagram account. I thought that was interesting how in your book, I think it was in the introduction or something, you talked about how that was created. What inspired you? Could you tell us the stories and when did you start it?
Yeah, I mean, my Instagram account has grown into a thing,
Mm.
but I initially started it, just because I was bored dating. People wanted to know what my Instagram was. And so I never had a personal Instagram. I had just gotten out of my relationship. This was about 5 years ago or 6 years ago now. So I was like, okay, I'll start an Instagram, and I'll just post art and like maybe a selfie. And then having never been on Instagram, I had never seen any therapeutic sexual wellness content ever. So I started seeing that and I was like, what the fuck is all of this? So then I was like, I have thoughts about this. And so then I've always been a creative person. So I was like, whatever, if these people can do it, I'm gonna just like do it. I'm bored. I have nothing better to do. And then it just started to become something that was entertaining for me and stimulating. So I just kept making more posts and then it kind of some of them went viral. And then I was like, oh, like people actually agree and like this stuff. So then, one thing led to the next.
So, have you seen it? Is there anything particular that you remember seeing that was like the worst advice you've ever seen, or just really like you didn't agree with when you were starting out on Instagram? Because I think when I go to the explore page, you see all these carousels of if your relationship is like this, then this, and here are the red flags for this and that. Was there anything in particular that you remember seeing and you thought, oh my God, this is so wrong? Or
Yeah, I mean, it was basically that. It was all of the posts that were here are the top 5 signs that you are in a relationship with a narcissist, or that your relationship is codependent, or that you're unhealthy, or that you're immature, or, really a lot of labeling and diagnosing based on, you breathe, you have fights, you want to be alone, things that are normal parts of our experience in and out of relationships being pathologized as something bad in the list. Um, so, I mean, there was like pretty much, there was a lot of stuff. It was codependency, it was narcissism. I mean, it's still there too. I remember seeing posts of like, "You're immature if," this just felt
Okay.
so blaming. Um, and I think at this point I may have posts that are probably blamey too. But at least at the beginning, that's where I started seeing these things that were really just reductive and overly simplified ideas of something that was very, very complex.
Yeah, because I think we've all, I don't know, I've been at risk of doing that kind of, trying to self-diagnose and go to Instagram or YouTube, and then you put things in and then you see certain results and it's like 5 signs that you're blah, blah, blah. And then you think, oh my God. So it's like putting you in this category. And what I really loved about your books, let's talk about your book, How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. Obviously, the title is amazing. So can you tell us the meaning behind the title? Was that easy for you to come up with, or was it a work?
No. No, I mean, I had a million titles and it was a
Okay.
group effort. And at the beginning, I actually didn't like the title. But it was, I couldn't settle on something. And me and my editor were like, okay, we got to pick something. And this is what we went with. And now I love it. But just to be clear, you are going to lose your mind in
That's
love, in
okay.
life.
Hmm.
It's a bit of a bait and switch. It's a bit sarcastic.
Mm.
Um, in terms of the imperfections, the limitations, the fundamental disappointments of all relationships and life in general. That not every day is going to be sunny, and we are going to really lose our minds at some point with our partner. We could even lose our mind with a kid, our children, or our pets. People can drive us nuts. People
Mm.
are annoying. I'm annoying. Everyone's annoying. So the title is really, a nod to that, to the experience of deeply caring for somebody, but also being driven nuts by them.
Hmm. That's one of my big takeaways from the book was embracing and accepting the imperfection of relationships. That's something I take away from it. Is that something
Yeah.
you wanted to?
Um, yeah, it's a big piece of it. And embracing the imperfections of absolutely everything, of life, of
Mm.
ourselves, of others, of really being able to honor just how imperfect and limited we all are. And to
Mm.
find meaning in those limitations, to understand the stories behind our flaws and why we struggle, as opposed to investing in this belief that we shouldn't struggle or have challenges, which is a bit of how life and relationships are framed online and in social media, that any kind of life challenge or any kind of relational challenge is now being framed as unhealthy.
Mm.
Um, when the reality is that, we're all kind of unhealthy. We all do things that we otherwise, would wish we didn't. And especially when it comes to love, we can be driven to the brink of insanity and do and say crazy shit. Um, we're imperfect, and it's because we are, one, human beings and our brains are not designed like computers, and two, we live in cultures that do absolutely nothing to help us understand ourselves, our emotions, our partners. We're never taught how to give an apology or how to
Mm.
understand what sadness means. So, and then we experience trauma and we never understand it, and then we're in relationships, things are going to come up. So everybody is a little bit unhealthy.
Yeah, that's one of the chapters, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
With
it
you.
is.
Yeah. So it was a really personal book. I loved how personal and vulnerable you got, because I just think that really helps you to connect with the author, especially when it's in the first person. Did it feel like therapy to you actually writing all of it?
It was therapeutic.
Mm.
I was writing it actually not reflecting. I was writing it go while I was going through it. It
Mm.
being, I write about being in my relationship, ending it, and then remaining in contact with my ex in a very unboundaried relationship, and then having that relationship end. And that's where my writing really was. I was in a bit of a depressive episode writing about what was the content of my
Mhm.
depression. So it was really therapeutic. It was really hard, but it was writing my story out and really developing a deeper understanding with it that was the therapeutic aspect of it. It was really reparative for me to be able to do that. And I uncovered a lot about myself that I don't know if I would have if I wasn't, analyzing to death what had happened. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. It was also just a little bit weird to be like writing for 4 hours about like my trauma and then like meeting a friend for dinner and being like, "Hey, how are you? How's your day?" Um, so it was a little bizarre in that sense, but in terms of working through and really writing out my story, it was really helpful. And that's what I really encourage throughout the book, to the readers and to your listeners, is that we really have to develop a deeper connection with our story. And the reason why I shared my story and my client's stories is to encourage people to write their own stories, to understand themselves better, to develop more self-awareness, to make what's unconscious conscious. And we do that by reflecting and having conversations with our parents about their stories and sharing our stories with friends and asking them about theirs. That it's a really important piece of how we grow, is
Mm.
developing a connection to our story. And so that's something that I did while writing the book to my own story. And it was really powerful and really impactful for me.
Hmm. And one part I remember, if I remember correctly, you talked about if your partner's in a bad mood, like how to hold space for them. Would you like to go into that? Because I think sometimes we expect our partners to be always like upbeat and connecting and all of that. I think it was, I can't remember exactly how would you like to share?
Yeah, I say let them be in a bad mood.
Uh,
This was something that was really hard for me in
mm,
my last relationship. My partner would be in a bad mood, and I would be like, his bad mood is ruining my mood, and whatever.
mhm,
But the reality is that, we have to hold space for our partner to be in a variety of moods, just like we're
mm,
going to be in a variety of moods. Sometimes it's a bad mood, sometimes it's a good mood. But it's important that we are able to accept that and hold space for it and tolerate it and be separate um, from them, meaning they can be in a bad mood and I can be in a good mood. We don't have to be on the same page in the same boat
mm,
constantly. And that's something that's really hard. Of course, we want the person who we're sharing space with to be in a good mood. Sometimes they're not. And it's not about us, and we don't have to make it about us either. But it's something important to do that I think many of us struggle with, to really accept that our partners are human and that they're not
mm,
always going to be in a good mood.
mm. Yeah, and also that you're responsible for your own mood as well. I think that's something. Sometimes we give a lot of power away to our partners to make us feel good. Mm. Something you just touched
Yeah.
on there about you talked about interviewing your parents. I thought that was a very interesting concept about their relationships. Why do you recommend this, and how can it help?
Well, our parents' story is part of our story, and their parents' story is also part of our story.
Mm,
And so we live our lives in a very intergenerational way. Yet most of us don't grow up in families that are actually telling those stories that are being enacted behaviorally and emotionally throughout generations. So, when I interviewed my mom, it was really pretty groundbreaking for me because I realized that many of the themes that I struggled with, she also struggled with. Many of the ways in which I sought love paralleled the ways in which she sought love. Many of my traumas paralleled her traumas. So a lot of these experiences were inherited. And if I didn't, it's very easy to objectify our parents for what they are supposed to or didn't or do for us, and to say, well, they didn't love me in this way and they didn't do this thing and they were a bad parent and I'm, blah, blah, blah. It's much harder to humanize them and to seek to understand why they didn't give us what we needed. And so it's a really important piece of our story because many of us will say, well, I wasn't good enough. It was my fault. And we internalize that. Sometimes consciously, we think our parents didn't love us because we were unlovable, and other times it's just an unconscious core belief that we develop of feeling unlovable. But if we're able to talk to our parents and to understand, why they were unavailable for us, that can be really, really powerful.
Mhm. Are there any
So
particular
it's a must
questions that you
together.
recommend for that type of conversation? Would there be three questions that you recommend to kind of start that conversation?
I have a whole list of questions in the book, but you want to be curious. You want to know what their relationship was like with their parents growing up.
Mm,
I asked my mom a lot about, what was dating like? What were expectations for you at that time as a woman? What did marriage mean to you? How did that evolve over time? What was independence like? What was it like to
mm,
be dependent? What was it like being a mother? Just basic questions that we might want to know the answers of. Did you experience any traumas? Um, did your parents, most of us are connected to some kind of war or some kind of atrocity in one way or another, whether it's our grandparents or great grandparents. So, we can also talk about that. Um, so there's a lot there. The questions are really endless.
mhm. Yeah, I guess sometimes it can be quite difficult to approach those topics depending on what your relationship is like with your parents. Yeah, it can be quite hard for some
Yeah.
people. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the challenge, is that many people do not have that type of relationship with their parents where they're asking deeper questions. And that's also part of the exercise, is that the relationship that's not there is one that's decided by the parent. And so when you go back and you say, no, we don't talk about this, but I want to talk about this, you enter the relationship as an adult. Your parent might say, I don't want to talk about this. And you can say, this is really important to me. You can treat it like an interview. It doesn't have to be this hugely connective emotional moment. Um, but it's something that I think is an important experience to have as an adult with a parent to push and challenge against that dynamic of we don't talk or we don't share or we don't go deep.
Definitely. Can create deeper bonds as well with your parents as well. It can really improve the relationship. Something I really loved about your book, which resonates with me profoundly, is about sex as a love language. Because I think, sometimes there's too much. People think that it's bad to have, sex as a foundation. But I found I took it was like a paragraph that you described. Sometimes when you have really good sex with someone, you want to repeat, and then you repeat and repeat and repeat. Then suddenly these emotional bonds are formed, and then you find yourself in this relationship. I mean, that's how my story has been in my life. And I loved what you talked about, sex as a love language, and sex is a kind of a non-verbal way of expressing love as well. Would you like to tell us more about that? Mm,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people often relegate sex to this like category of passion and lust. And that's
mm,
not to say that it's not, but sex
mm,
is about a lot more than passion, lust, and an orgasm,
mm,
especially, when you're connecting with somebody or if it's in a long-term relationship, sex can really be a communication of love. And it can even be with a casual partner. You can
mm,
definitely feel loved, and cared for by somebody during sex. And sex it's a highly relational act, even if it's with a stranger. It is a dynamic. And so it becomes about much, much more. And it can be a way to give love, it can be a way to receive love. Um, it's a very vulnerable thing to do. And so it's just important that people stop reducing sex and saying it's just sex, because it's never just sex. There's always meaning there, there's always a story there, there's always a connection there. Even if the connection is based on something anonymous, that's still a connection. It's just a connection that's anonymous. But in loving relationships, sex often becomes a vehicle, an expression of love, a love language. And
mm,
so it's important not to diminish the power of what is communicated during sex. People always talk about love languages as being affection or,
mm,
positive affirmation or spending time together, but sex can be a love language. And
mm,
for many people, it often is.
mm. Yeah, when you talked about love languages, said it reminds me of also of those things that we see on Instagram. We see attachment styles, love languages, and then people are looking to those theories to see if they are compatible with their partners. What would you say to that? Mm.
Compatible in terms of their love, in terms of, well, okay,
Just, yeah.
who knows? I mean,
Mhm.
that's the question, right?
Mm.
Who's compatible with whom? We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we could say there's a Virgo and a Pisces.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody will give you a different answer. An anxious and
Mm.
avoidant, that's the most trendy thing to talk about right now. Um,
Mm.
and compatibility isn't about a specific style or a favorite color of ice cream.
Mm.
Um, you know, if we want to talk about compatibility, we want to talk about, well, what do you want? And so
Mm.
compatibility sexually, compatibility for a long-term relationship, like, what is it that you want? And then if it's about compatibility for a long-term partner, the question is more so about, are you able to do the work together to
Mm.
work through difference? It doesn't matter if your difference is based on your attachment style or what it is. Every partner is fundamentally different. We're all different from each other. And differences are going to surface, and that's going to create conflict. And so I'm less concerned with pointing out differences and finding, similarities or what differences work the best, and more so about how people learn to engage with their partner around differences, how they negotiate difference, how they have conflict and challenge each other based on their differences, and then what they do to repair based on those differences. And this is how we grow in relationships. So, all this stuff about, match and the right person and the one and all of this shit, I think it sounds great and I wish that that
Mm.
was true. But the reality is that um, the feasibility of a relationship, long-term satisfaction, um, is more so about a couple's ability to work through difference, repair, have fun, and connect than it is about a specific style
Mhm.
or preference.
Yeah, and also like how they communicate with those things as well, and just because sometimes I think I can't remember who I interviewed someone about, when sex is good, that's kind of like more of a reward, to kind of sort out all of the other things in a relationship as opposed to having
Mhm.
everything great and the sex bad, there's less of an incentive to
Mhm. Yeah.
um, you touched on the avoidance style, avoidant attachment style there. And that reminds me, I think I've seen something recently on your Instagram about being ghosted or someone not texting back. What advice would you give to someone who's been ghosted? Because that's a very common thing now. People don't, give closure when there's, in casual dating scenarios or even just chatting, people just kind of disappear. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it really fucking sucks.
yeah.
Being ghosted is not fun, and do not ghost anyone, please.
Mhm.
But it sucks. I mean, and I know that what most people want to do is they want to text the person, they want to, call them, email them, fax them, whatever. But if somebody's ghosted you, that kind of has to be a period at the end of the sentence. And if they come back into your life, don't let them back into your life.
Yeah.
Um, maybe be friends, but I wouldn't feel comfortable or safe being vulnerable with a person who disappears
Mm.
like that. So what advice would I give? I would say go date other people
Mm.
immediately.
What about stonewalling? That's kind of a similar thing, isn't it? Just kind of silent treatment and just when well, they'll come back, but they're kind of like not communicating.
If someone's ghosted you and comes back,
Yeah, I think they call it stonewalling. When someone you're actually involved with someone and then they kind of like
oh,
disappear to
if you're in a relationship with somebody and they're giving you the silent treatment, I mean, the
yeah.
silent treatment is manipulative. It's really not a good thing to do in a relationship. It gets you nowhere.
Mm.
That's something that you'd want to address with your partner.
Mhm. But also,
It's
what would
kind
you
of a
think
like, we don't
about?
do this.
Yeah, what do you think about, when someone is doing that through, let's say, self-defense for their own emotional safety? It's not really about malice or manipulation. Because that can be, I mean, how
Yeah,
can
well, I mean,
support that?
there's always a story behind all different
Mm.
kinds of behavior. But just because there's a story behind behavior doesn't make it okay.
Mm.
And if they need space, then they can, people should communicate. I need space. I need a little bit of quiet time, not completely shut
Mm.
your partner out and ignore them and not speak to them.
Mm.
So, we have to understand the story behind that shutdown. And
Mm.
usually it's connected to some kind of attachment trauma where the shutdown was the only thing possible. But either way, it's still something that's pretty harmful in a relationship when you refuse to speak to somebody.
Mm.
Um, so you don't want to do that. You want to
Mm.
tell them, I'm really struggling right now. I'm feeling like I'm going to shut down. I need an hour. I need
Mm.
2 hours, and then we'll kind of revisit.
Mm.
But you never want to just shut off and turn off and push your partner away in that sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and you also talked about in the book about I think it was, triggers can be about 70% about past triggers or something like that. Would you like to explain what
Mhm.
what that
About what a trigger is?
yeah, or about you said something like when something's happening now, it's 70% is about the past. It's not really about the present moment. I can't remember what it was exactly.
Yeah, so if we're triggered, that
Uh-huh.
means that something powerful has come up, powerful
Uh-huh.
emotional experience, a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of something, something really intense. That's usually meaning that something from our earlier traumas, our earlier childhood, has been triggered. And so it's not to say that what's happened in the present's irrelevant. It's just to say that it's about both your present and your past. And so what I was saying earlier about understanding story is that these are moments where we can really understand and use as an opportunity to connect with our story. So when you're feeling something really intense, even if it is being triggered by something your partner did, a lot of that material, a lot of that power, the largeness of the emotion that comes up, that's more so connected to something earlier than it is to what your partner did. And so we really want to understand these moments. So when your partner does something like that again, one, you can tell your partner when you do this thing, it triggers this time when my mom used to do whatever. Can we try to sidestep this in one way or another? And also, if they can't, you can know that when you do get triggered by whatever it is that your partner is doing, you can know where that largeness really comes from. And instead of reacting and screaming, yelling, or whatever, you can say to yourself, this is about, my mother, and I know that my partner did this thing that I don't like, but this is not necessarily about them.
Mm-hmm. And you said in the book that a breakup was like open heart surgery. So what's the best way to get over heartbreak, do you think?
It is like open heart surgery. It really requires a lot of recovery,
Mm,
kindness, self-compassion, being with friends, dating other people, doing all of the things. People are really hard on themselves when it comes to relational endings. They call it a
mm,
failure, they blame themselves or they blame their ex. When the reality is it's a sad story, and we have to
mm,
really just honor that sadness and that grief and go through it, and just do our best to learn from it. Because it's a really big opportunity. It's an
mm,
opportunity to learn and grow. And that's kind of the idea behind relational endings, is that we learn, grow, and therefore make better relationships. Um, but we can't do that if we're blaming ourselves, our partner, if we're putting timeline on our grief. We have to let ourselves just go through and experience whatever it is that's coming up. But it's so, so painful. It's so painful.
mm. And
Awful.
also, I think for friends I've seen around me going through it, it's kind of like a not a linear thing. It's kind of there's ups and downs. So some days it can feel really hard. I think people find Sundays quite difficult sometimes when everyone's in family mode, or that's the time when people feel most lonely. Do you have any advice about getting back onto the dating scene after breakups? Mm.
Just do it.
Mm,
I mean, but also do whatever makes you feel most comfortable.
mm,
But I know many people are like, I should wait, I should do stuff, blah, blah, blah. If you want to wait, wait. But if you don't,
mm,
don't. There's no real factual basis for a certain amount of time to wait after a breakup before you start dating and having sex again. I tell people
mm,
to do it as right away.
mm,
And but that does not mean pretend like you didn't just go through a breakup and ignore all of your
mm,
feelings and don't explore them or learn from them. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can both date and have sex with other people while healing ourselves, while repairing ourselves, while going through a breakup.
mm,
We can if you want to.
I love
And
that
if you don't,
expression.
don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of that expression, get over one guy, get under another.
Yeah, why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah. That can definitely work. Unless you're going on a date and talking about the ex all the time, that could be not very sexy, maybe. So what are you working on at the moment?
Yes, my dog is barking at who knows what. I'm working on my book. I'm working on promoting it,
Mm,
talking about it, connecting with people around it. It's kind of the main thing I'm doing. It just came out last week on June 4th. So my current focus is, doing my best to talk about it and share it with everybody.
And have you been to the bookstores to see it on the shelf and everything? How did that feel?
Yeah, I actually went yesterday. It was weird. I was like, oh, there's my book.
But you waited 6 days or so, how many?
That's
8 days?
exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, I was anxious. I was like, oh my God, people are gonna see me. I'm like, no one's gonna know who you are. Like, get over yourself. So I went. And it was cool.
Mm. You take some pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really cool feeling. Because I think that I've published about 3 books here, and on that first day, I'm out just to see how it's the position of
Hmm.
it in a shop.
Yeah,
It's kind of
it's
cool.
cool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really beautiful. I think it's like having a baby almost. Not that I've had a baby, but it's like this. It starts off as a Word document, then it becomes this kind of.
Yeah.
I just got my fourth book back yesterday, The Corrections. I find that
Oh my
fascinating to
God.
see someone else has, put
More
their.
books. That's so cool.
Yeah. The next one's called be called Orgasmic Manifestation. So it's
Nice.
yeah. So it's kind of cool to see all those a team behind your idea, and then you see like the layout and then the cover, the graphic design. It's like a quite a collaborative project in the end.
It is. Yeah, I loved it.
What was the most difficult part for you in the
The
creative
cover.
process? Hmm?
The cover.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we just went back and forth a lot about it, and it was hard for me to land on a design that I liked, but we landed
Mm,
on one. We did it. But the writing process I loved. I loved my editor, and we really got along great. And I loved her ideas and her contributions. And I mean, the writing process, while it was hard, it was something I really loved doing. So hopefully, I too will write other books. That would be great.
I'm sure you will. So
Awesome.
I can see lots of books behind you. I have a whole shelf of my podcast
I can
guests' books
see.
here.
Cool.
So I'm really a big reader. So what is the book that changed your life?
Uh, Book that changed my life. I mean, the book that had a really huge impact on me was Esther Perel's book, her first book, Mating in Captivity. I read that um, after my ex had cheated on me, and it was really helpful. I was in a really bad place because of it and very, very anxious, and it helped me shift my understanding of relationships um,
Mm,
in terms of how I was approaching infidelity and desire and all of those things. So that had a really big impact on me.
mm. You read anything at the moment?
Right now, what am I reading? I'm reading Danae Logan's book, Sovereign Love. It just came out close to mine.
Is that another relationship book?
Yeah.
Is that your favorite genre for for work and just interest?
Yeah, I tend to read a lot of nonfiction.
Mhm.
I haven't read a novel in a very long time.
Yeah.
But I do. I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of books on sex and relationships. It's what's stimulating. I also like just need to continuously be learning and growing
Mhm.
if I want to be good at what I do. So
Definitely.
yeah.
So what is a quote or phrase that you live by?
A quote or a phrase that I live by. I don't know. It's gonna be okay. I'm gonna be okay. I'm safe.
Hmm.
Something like that.
Hmm. That's good. Amazing. So I think you've seen lots of transformations in it because like the stories, the case studies in your book are quite interesting because it seems like there's some deep issues happening, and then it's kind of nice to see that people can overcome um, some big what seemingly big traumas in a relationship. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, change happens. It's really special to have these relationships with my clients and to see them work through their traumas and their hurts and their pains and to be there with them. It's almost like having, an additional hour of therapy per client, because
Hmm.
I can relate to each and every one's story. Um, that these themes are often universal, which is why I wrote the book in terms of how I share my story and my client's story.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting
They're
how you
so
talked about
common.
how you connected with that or you learned yourself from their stories and you try to,
Yeah.
yeah. And also to share your story with them because that's not really usual for a therapist usually. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't sit in session and talk about my father, but I
Yeah.
will disclose and kind of be like, same, when talking about some certain things, or like, my partner does the same thing and it drives me crazy too, or like whatever. But yeah, I think it's a piece of how I work
So you got any
as a therapist.
advice for couples who are thinking about going into therapy?
Go.
Just do it.
Um, Do it. Yeah, it doesn't like,
Mm,
go at 6 months, go at 5 years, go. I mean, go if you think if you want to break up, go if you want to stay together, go if you're having sex, go if there's no reason not to go.
mm,
I don't think that couples are really equipped to work through issues on their own.
mm,
We're so biased. We've all experienced trauma in one way or another. And many of the ways in which we're interacting with our partners are based on unconscious dynamics that we cannot understand without somebody else's help.
mm,
So if you're in a relationship, even if things are just great, I mean, there's really nothing um, to lose by going to therapy. There's only more connection to be had,
Mhm.
more peace to be gained, more understanding both yourself and your partner. I mean, it can be really powerful.
So you'd also recommend it for like, let's say, relationship maintenance if there are no obvious problems.
Yeah.
Mhm. Great.
But I mean, it's a personal decision. I mean, if you don't
Uh,
want to go, don't go. But I'm
yeah.
biased because I'm a therapist. I love it.
We've seen that so many transformations as well. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. So where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram at yourdiagnonsense or on my
Mhm.
website, which is my name, toddsbaratz.com.
Perfect. And thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining us today on the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. I wish you all the success with your book. I really enjoyed it. And I'll be
Thank
leaving
you. Thank
this.
you for having me. It's been nice to
Okay.
connect with you.
Okay, likewise.